The past never stays buried. Not in New Orleans. Detective Blues. Chapter 1. Angola Federal releases its men on Tuesdays, Corinne said from behind the reception desk she shared with a dying fern and 3 months of unopened mail. Did you know that? Tuesdays. Like it's a produce delivery. Jack Dolan stood at the coffee maker with his back to her and did not say anything. The coffee maker needed descaling. He had been meaning to descale it since February. It was now the second week of July, and the machine produced something the color of creek water with aspirations. "You're not on a case," she said. "Nobody called. Nobody emailed. The Thibodeau thing settled, which means the check you're waiting on went to the lawyer, which means you're not getting paid this month either." She paused to let that breathe. "So, I need to know what you're doing with that thermos." "Keeping my options open." "Jack, I'll be back by Thursday." Corinne Arsenault had been Jack Dolan's office manager, building landlord, and former mother-in-law for 11 years. She occupied these roles the way some women occupy church pews, with a permanent quality, as if she'd been installed. She wore reading glasses on a beaded chain, and used them to look at Dolan over the top of the lenses in a way that communicated entire legal briefs without speaking. "Thursday," she said. "Latest." He picked up his thermos and his keys and his jacket, linen the color of old newsprint, bought at a Pensacola thrift store the year before, and walked out the door of the office he rented for $800 a month in a building on Decatur Street, 3 blocks from the river and half a block from a bar he no longer visited with the enthusiasm he once had. The street smelled like it always smelled, chicory and old stone, and the river pushing through underneath everything else, that thick mineral insistence the Mississippi had about making itself known. New Orleans in July was not a place. It was a condition. The Crown Vic sat on the street where he'd left it the night before, the windshield glazed with that particular combination of humidity and river particulate that passed for weather on the Gulf Coast. Dolan wiped it with the edge of his jacket, which accomplished nothing, and got in. The AC unit mounted under the dash made a sound like a small animal reconsidering its choices, and then blew air that was 2 degrees cooler than the air outside. In Pensacola, that would have been inadequate. In New Orleans in July, you took it. He pulled out of the space, turned toward the Crescent City connection, and pointed himself northwest on the interstate toward Angola State Penitentiary, which sat on 18,000 acres of former plantation land inside a horseshoe bend of the Mississippi River, 2 hours north of the city, and which was releasing one of its residents this morning at 9 a.m. Dolan had not been hired to be there. He wanted to be clear about that, at least in his own mind, because the distinction still mattered to him, even if it mattered to no one else. He was there because he had not slept well in approximately 10 years, and because the arithmetic of the thing had been working on him the whole time, and because there was one specific case in his 22-year career with the NOPD that had never closed the way he told people it had closed. The man's name was Rafael Mendez. Dolan had arrested him in 2014 on a marine salvage fraud charge after a 6-month investigation that had started as a routine tip about falsified equipment manifests and had turned into something considerably less routine. The case had gone through a federal grand jury, survived 2 defense motions to dismiss, and put Mendez into Angola for 10 years with no possibility of reduction. The conviction stood on a solid foundation of documented evidence, 3 credible witnesses, and a federal maritime statute that the U.S. attorney had deployed with the precision of a man who had been waiting for the right case to use it on. It was a good arrest. Clean. Professional. The kind of collar that earns you a commendation and a good word from the district commander at the holiday party. Dolan had gotten the commendation. He'd made the party. He'd accepted the handshakes. And he had driven home that night and sat in his kitchen until 2 in the morning with a bottle of Elijah Craig, and the specific, sustained discomfort of a man who knows exactly what he did not put in his case file. He drove with the windows cracked, the thermos between his thighs, WWOZ out of the dash speaker, playing something with a trumpet in it. He passed Laplace, and then the Bonnet Carré spillway, and then the land began to open up, the suburbs peeling away, and the road going flat and green, the kind of Louisiana flat that went all the way to the sky without interruption. Herons stood in the roadside ditches like men waiting for something they'd been assured was coming. He got to Angola at 8:45 and parked on the road outside the main gate, engine running, AC doing its best. He ate a shrimp po' boy he'd picked up from a gas station in Gonzales and watched the gate, and felt about as professional as a man could feel, eating a gas station sandwich outside a maximum security prison at 8:45 in the morning while waiting for someone no one had paid him to find. The po' boy was actually decent. That was something. At 9:03, the gate opened and Rafael Mendez walked out into the Louisiana morning. He looked different and exactly the same, which was the thing about 10 years. It changed the surface without touching whatever was underneath. The hair was shorter, cut close at the sides, more gray now at the temples. The face had settled into itself, the way faces do when the softness burns off and what remains is structural. He was 47, and he moved like a man who had done 10 years of prison yard calisthenics, not because it passed the time, but because he had somewhere specific to be when he got out, and he intended to be ready for it. He carried a paper bag in one hand. He wore dark slacks and a light blue shirt with the sleeves rolled to the elbow, which was not what Angola issued, and which meant someone had sent civilian clothes ahead, which meant someone on the outside had been thinking about this day and preparing for it. That was worth noting. Mendez stopped just past the gate and stood there a moment with his face tilted up toward the sky the way people do after a long time in a room, just taking the light. Then he put the paper bag under his arm, fished a pair of sunglasses from his shirt pocket, aviators, not prison issue, definitely sent with the clothes, and put them on. He looked up the road, in one direction and then the other. Dolan slid down slightly in the seat. A reflex. 22 years of surveillance muscle memory, operating without his permission. A cab appeared from the far end of the road. Called ahead had to be, because there were no cab stands outside Angola Federal Penitentiary, this not being an area where optimistic taxi entrepreneurs set up shop. Mendez raised one hand without looking for it, the way a man hails a cab when he knows it's coming, and it pulled up and he got in. Dolan waited until it cleared the first bend, then pulled out and followed. What he did not see, because he was watching the cab, were the two other vehicles that had been parked farther up the road with better sight lines than his own. The first was a silver Audi A6 with a rental sticker on the bumper, and two men in it who wore jackets despite the July heat, and who had been parked there since 7:30 with the engine running and the AC at full blast, because they were Spanish and found Louisiana in summer professionally offensive. The second was a black Chevrolet Tahoe with Texas plates and aftermarket tinting, and two men in it who had been there since 6, because they had driven from Beaumont the night before and had not bothered with a hotel. The cab took the road south toward Baton Rouge. The Audi pulled out 30 seconds after Dolan. The Tahoe pulled out 30 seconds after the Audi. It was a Tuesday morning in July in the Louisiana River Country, and Rafael Mendez had been free for approximately 4 minutes. The cab stopped at a Motel 6 on Airline Highway in Baton Rouge, which was not a location that suggested a man with plans, which was probably why Mendez chose it. He paid the driver, went to the office, came out with a key card, and walked to a room on the ground floor at the far end of the building, corner unit, 2 exterior walls. Old habit. Dolan had the same habit, and recognized it the way one poker player reads another. He parked at the far end of the lot and watched the room from behind a pair of Bushnells he kept in the glove box, next to a registration that was 11 months expired and a half-eaten roll of wintergreen lifesavers. The curtains in Mendez's room stayed closed. A light came on, went off, came on again. 20 minutes later, a delivery driver arrived with a pizza box, which meant Mendez had a phone and had used it almost immediately because that was the kind of man he was, always thinking 3 steps ahead of whatever room he was in. Dolan lowered the binoculars and thought about that. He thought about it for a while. The AC hiccuped. A semi rolled through the lot. Somewhere in the middle distance, a freight train moved through the Baton Rouge rail yards, and its horn carried across the flat land all the way to the parking lot of the Motel 6 on Airline Highway, and then faded. He had not told Corinne the real reason he was here. He told her nothing real as a practice, because Corinne had the ability to receive information and use it to her own ends in ways that Dolan found impressive and alarming in equal measure. What he knew, and kept to himself, was this: Rafael Mendez had found something in the Gulf of Mexico in the summer of 2013 that had been lost there since the 16th century. What he had found was worth, conservatively, $650 million. The federal government had seized half of it as material evidence. The other half had never appeared. Not in the investigation. Not in the trial. Not in 10 years of very quiet, very persistent inquiry by several agencies and at least 2 foreign governments that Dolan knew about, and possibly others he didn't. The case file said the matter was closed. The case file was incorrect. He reached for his thermos and found it empty. He screwed the cap back on and set it on the seat beside him and looked at the door of room 114, which remained closed, and thought about what he was actually doing here in a parking lot in Baton Rouge on a Tuesday in July. An unemployed private investigator in an $1,100 car, eating the last wintergreen lifesaver from a roll he couldn't remember buying. He was here because the arithmetic had never added up, and he was constitutionally unable to leave bad arithmetic alone. That was the professional answer. The personal answer was more complicated, and he set it aside, the way he set aside most of the personal answers, in the mental equivalent of a fireproof box under the floorboards. The door to room 114 opened. Mendez stepped out without the paper bag, which meant he'd left it inside, which meant he intended to come back. He had a phone now, a new one, cheap burner by the look of it, the kind you bought at Walgreens, and he tapped at it as he walked toward the motel's vending machine alcove. He got a Coke and a pack of crackers, and stood in the alcove eating crackers and looking at his phone with the expression of a man reading messages that had been waiting for him for 10 years. Dolan watched. Around the corner of the building, where Mendez could not see it from the alcove, and where Dolan could only see it at the edge of his peripheral vision, the silver Audi sat with its engine running. Around the other corner, in the shadow of the ice machine housing, the black Tahoe had parked diagonally and turned off its lights. Dolan looked at the Audi. He looked at the Tahoe. He looked at room 114, and the paper bag presumably inside it, and the closed curtains. He unscrewed the empty thermos and screwed it back on. Then he got out of the Crown Vic, because staying in the car had stopped being an option roughly 90 seconds ago, and his knees already knew it before the rest of him did, and walked toward the vending machine alcove with his hands in his jacket pockets, and the particular loose-shouldered walk of a man who has no reason to be anywhere in particular and is taking his time getting there. Mendez looked up from his phone when Dolan was 10 feet away. He looked at him with those flat dark eyes behind the aviators, and his face did not change. His face had probably not changed in a long time. Then he looked back at his phone. "You drive a Crown Vic," he said, "and you don't think anyone can see you." Dolan stopped at the vending machine and studied the selections. I parked it far away. It's a Crown Vic, Jack. There are 3 of them left in Louisiana, and they all belong to retired police. He ate a cracker without looking up. Also, you need to shave. I've been meaning to. What do you want? Coke, Dolan said, and fed 4 quarters into the machine. The Coke came down, and he caught it and opened it and drank some, and looked at the parking lot the way 2 men standing in a vending machine alcove look at a parking lot when they both know there are other cars in it that matter. Silver Audi is European government, Dolan said. Rental plates, federal exemption sticker. Suits in July. Mendez ate another cracker. Black Tahoe is domestic private, Dolan said. Texas plates. Tinted past legal limit. Park sideways so the driver can pull out fast in either direction. He drank some more Coke. That one, I'd worry about. I've been worrying about it for 10 years, Mendez said. He pocketed his phone and folded the remaining crackers into the sleeve and tucked it in his shirt pocket. He took off the aviators and cleaned them on his shirt and put them back on. You arrested me, he said. You built the case, you walked it through the grand jury. You sat in the courtroom for 3 days and watched them sentence me, and you didn't blink. He paused. So what are you doing in my parking lot, Jack? Dolan finished the Coke. He held the empty can for a moment and then set it on top of the vending machine. I'm keeping my options open, he said. Mendez looked at him over the top of the aviators. It was not a warm look. It was not a hostile look. It was the look of a man who had been doing long arithmetic for a very long time and had just received a new variable. The Tahoe is going to move in about 4 minutes, Mendez said. When it does, I need to not be standing in this alcove. Your room's the wrong direction. I know that. I'm parked on the east end. Mendez looked at him. Your AC work? Partially. Partially, Mendez said. And something moved behind his eyes that might have been amusement and might have been something harder. Sure, he said. Why not? Let's go see how partially. They walked toward the east end of the lot at the pace of 2 men with nowhere to be, which was a performance they were both capable of. And behind them, the door of the Black Tahoe opened. Chapter 2. Don't run, Dolan said. I'm not running. Mendez matched his stride exactly, unhurried, the paper bag from inside the room left behind, 2 men crossing a parking lot with nothing on their minds. Running tells them something. What does walking tell them? That we don't know they're there. They know we know they're there. Then it tells them we're not scared of them. Mendez put his hands in his pockets, which is also useful. The Tahoe sat 40 yards behind them at an angle. Dolan tracked it in his peripheral vision, the way you track a dog that has not yet decided to bite. The driver's door was open, and a man stood beside it, broad through the chest, dark t-shirt, the particular stillness of someone who has practiced being still. He watched them cross the lot with no expression, Dolan could read at that distance. The Crown Vic was at the far end, nose in against a concrete curb that separated the motel lot from the access road. Dolan hit the unlock, and the car beeped once and they got in. He started it without drama, and backed out slowly and turned toward the exit and did not look at the Tahoe. Turn left, Mendez said. Left takes us back to the interstate. I know where left takes us. Dolan turned left. The AC made it sound. He checked the mirror, and the Tahoe had not moved yet, which meant they were either calling it in or they were very disciplined. And either way, it bought maybe 90 seconds before someone made a decision back there. Where are we going? Waffle House, Mendez said. He had the burner phone out, and was moving through the map on it with one thumb. There's one on Airline near the Segan exit. Take the surface road. The Tahoe will pick us back up before we clear the block. Yes. And the Audi? Probably. Mendez set the phone in his lap. The Audi is not my immediate problem. You want to tell me what your immediate problem is? Mendez looked at the window. The Baton Rouge suburbs moved past. The storage facilities and the tire shops and the transmission places and the chain restaurants set back on their concrete aprons. The city's working intestines, unglamorous and endless. He watched it the way men watch things they've been a long time without seeing. Breakfast, he said. Right now, my immediate problem is breakfast. The Waffle House on Airline Highway near Segan Lane occupied a position at the absolute center of the American grid. Fluorescent lit, counter-seated, open 23 hours a day because they closed 1 hour a year for cleaning, which Dolan had always found either admirable or deeply unsettling, depending on his mood. The parking lot held 6 cars and a bread truck. The windows ran floor to ceiling and let in the full weight of the July morning, which hit the linoleum and the laminate, and the chrome fixtures and bounced back amplified. They took a booth at the far end. Mendez sat with his back to the wall, which Dolan had expected, so Dolan sat across from him with his back to the room and his neck to the door, which was not his preference but was the available option. The waitress came, and Mendez ordered eggs over easy, wheat toast, grits, coffee. Dolan ordered the same, because it was faster, and he was watching the window. The Tahoe sat in the lot of the tire shop across the road. The Audi had parked 3 spaces down from the Crown Vic and the Waffle House lot itself, which Dolan found either bold or stupid, and was leaning toward bold. They're in the lot, he said. The suits. The suits. Tahoe is across the street. Mendez unrolled his silverware from the paper napkin. He laid the fork and the knife parallel on the table with the careful habit of a man who had eaten 10 years of institutional food and found the small rituals of civilian eating worth respecting. The men in the Audi are Spanish government, he said. It was not a question. That's my read. Patrimonio Nacional, probably. Cultural heritage, recovery. He accepted the coffee from the waitress and wrapped both hands around the mug. They've been watching the release date for a long time. They have a legal argument, and they believe in it. He drank. The men in the Tahoe do not have a legal argument. Who are they? Mendez set the mug down. He looked at it. You worked the case for 6 months, he said. You never found the financing. The shell company dissolved before we could trace the capital. Before you could trace it. The corner of his mouth moved. Someone put $300,000 into that salvage operation, Jack. They paid for the equipment, the crew, the dive permits, the sonar contract. Someone who expected a return that was somewhat larger than $300,000. The cartel, Dolan said. Mendez looked at him over the coffee mug with an expression that said Dolan had arrived at a conclusion Mendez had been living inside for 10 years. Which one? Does it matter? At this level, they share resources. He picked up the mug again. They think I know where their investment is. They are not wrong, technically, but they are wrong about what kind of thing their investment has become. He considered that. The men in that Tahoe do not make distinctions of that kind. The food arrived. Mendez ate with the focused attention of a man reconnecting with something. He ate the eggs first, then the grits, then the toast, and he did it with a neatness that was not fussiness but economy. Dolan ate without noticing what he was eating, which was how he ate most things. The Audi, Dolan said. What about it? They're going to make a move. They're going to make a move. Mendez mopped the plate with a corner of toast. They'll be polite. They're always polite. The Spanish government is very good at being polite about things that belong to them. He set the toast down. or that they believe belong to them, which is the same thing as far as they're concerned. Does it? Does what? Belong to them. Mendez picked up the coffee. He looked at Dolan with those flat, dark eyes that had been looking at things without commentary for a long time. No, he said. It doesn't. He said it the way a man states a fact about the weather. Not defiantly, not with heat, just as the accurate description of what was true. Dolan had interviewed several hundred people over a career, and he had developed a reliable internal instrument for the difference between a man who believed what he was saying and a man who was saying what he wanted believed. The instrument said Mendez believed it. What Dolan didn't know yet was why. He was thinking about asking when the door of the Audi opened. There were two of them, and they were in fact in jackets. Dark, slim-cut European suits that cost more than Dolan's monthly rent and conveyed the specific authority of people who had institutional money behind them and wanted you to know it without having to say it. The taller one was maybe 50, silver at the temples, a jaw that suggested he had never been uncertain about anything in his life. The shorter one carried a soft leather attaché and wore an expression of professional neutrality that had clearly been practiced. They crossed the parking lot and came through the door and stood for a moment, letting their eyes adjust from the Florida-adjacent July sun to the fluorescent interior, and then the taller one found the booth, and they came over and stood at the end of the table the way men stand at the end of tables when they have decided the conversation is happening whether you like it or not. Mr. Mendez, the taller one said. His English was careful and unaccented in the way that means someone spent a great deal of money learning it. My name is Vargas. This is my colleague, Agent Cortina. We represent the Office of Cultural Heritage Recovery of the Kingdom of Spain. He produced credentials in a leather folder and showed them with the brisk confidence of a man who has shown credentials in a great many countries and has never once been turned away. We apologize for the timing. No, you don't, Mendez said. Vargas took this without visible reaction. He glanced at Dolan with the brief, assessing look of a man cataloging an unexpected variable and assigning it a weight. Could we speak privately? You can speak however you like. This is a Waffle House. Mendez gestured at the booth across the aisle, which was empty. Sit down if you're going to. You're blocking the waitress. They sat. Cortina placed the attaché on the table and opened it with the practiced care of a man who regarded paper as a form of ammunition. He removed a document, bound, tabbed 3 centimeters thick, and placed it between the booths on the table's edge. Vargas looked at it, and then at Mendez. The Santa Catalina de Alejandría, Vargas said, was a registered vessel of the Spanish crown, sailing under royal charter in 1587 with a cargo manifest that falls under the provisions of the 2001 UNESCO Convention on Underwater Cultural Heritage, to which Spain is a signatory and the United States is not, Mendez said. Not a signatory, yes. Nevertheless, the legal standing of sovereign vessel property under international maritime law is established by. I've read it, Mendez said. Cortina had not moved. He sat with his hands folded on the attaché and watched Mendez with the expression of a man who has sat through many of these conversations and finds the opening moves predictable. Then you understand our position, Vargas said. I understand your position. Your position is that the Santa Catalina belongs to Spain by virtue of having once sailed under a Spanish flag, and that anything she carried belongs to Spain by the same logic, and that a sovereign claim doesn't expire regardless of how many centuries have passed. Mendez looked at him. Your position is also that you've been to federal court twice on this theory and lost both times, and that you're hoping I'll give you something your lawyers couldn't get you. Vargas was quiet for a moment. The federal rulings were narrow. They were definitive. They addressed the portion of the cargo in federal custody. Vargas leaned forward slightly. There is, as you know, a question of additional material. We are prepared to offer a recovery fee of 8% of appraised value, certified by an independent assessor of your choosing, payable through a treaty mechanism that would shield you from domestic tax. That's a generous number, Dolan said. Both agents looked at him. Vargas with mild surprise, Curtino with the expression of a man who has just revised his earlier assessment of the unexpected variable upward. 8% of $650 million, Dolan said. He put his coffee down. That's $52 million. That's a real number. He looked at Mendez. You should think about that. I've thought about it, Mendez said. For 10 years. And? Mendez folded his napkin on the table and looked at Vargas. I'll have my lawyer contact your office, he said. You don't have a lawyer, Curtino said. It was the first thing he'd said. His English was slightly more accented than Vargas's and considerably more direct. Then I'll get one, Mendez said. Thank you for the offer. The coffee here is better than it looks. Vargas considered him for a moment. He glanced at the document on the table, which Curtino retrieved with the same careful precision, and returned to the attaché. Vargas produced a card from his inside pocket and set it on the table between the salt shaker and the hot sauce. We're in Baton Rouge through the end of the week, he said. After that, New Orleans. He stood. The offer has a shelf life, Mr. Mendez. Things in motion tend to become complicated. Things in motion, Mendez said, tend to stay in motion. Newton figured that out. Vargas allowed something that was not quite a smile, and then he and Curtino walked back through the Waffle House and out the door, and got into the Audi and did not move. Dolan picked up the card and looked at it. Heavy stock embossed, a small royal seal in the upper left corner. He set it back down. If you're not going to use that, I'll take it. Why? Because a Spanish government business card is the classiest thing that's ever been on my desk. Mendez looked at him over the coffee, and this time whatever moved behind his eyes was closer to the genuine article. He pushed the card across the table. They were in the parking lot, Dolan with his keys out, when the Tahoe crossed Airline Highway. It came across the 4-lane at a speed that was not rushing, but was not cautious either. A vehicle operated by men who had calculated that a parking lot in broad daylight was not a place you did certain things, and were operating in that margin of confidence. It swung in from the east entrance and came around the bread truck and stopped at an angle that blocked the Crown Vic's exit without being the kind of obvious block that reads from the road. 2 men got out. Not the man who'd stood by the driver's door at the motel. These were different, younger, one of them with the particular neck and shoulder architecture that comes from systematic physical development, and the other thin and loose-jointed and watchful in a way that was somehow worse. The thin one had his hands in his jeans pockets. He walked like there was no hurry, because there was no hurry. Dolan put himself slightly to Mendez's left and back. Old geometry. Raphael, the big one said. He said it with the familiarity of a name used as a statement rather than a greeting. He stopped 6 feet out and looked at Mendez with eyes that were doing inventory. You look good. Prison agreed with you. It didn't, Mendez said. Mr. Vila wants to have a conversation. He's been patient. The big one spread his hands in a gesture that was meant to convey reasonableness, and conveyed instead the rehearsed quality of a gesture learned from someone else. You've been away. He understands that. Now you're back, and the conversation needs to happen. Who's Vila? Dolan said. The big one looked at him. He took his time, about it. Who are you? I'm his lawyer, Dolan said. Mendez said nothing, which Dolan took as permission. His lawyer, the big one said. That's right. And I'm going to need you to explain the nature of your client's business with my client in terms that don't require me to file an immediate report with the Louisiana State Police, which I will do from this parking lot right now if you'd like to continue blocking our vehicle. Dolan had his phone out. He did not look at it. I've got a lieutenant on speed dial who takes a personal interest in unlicensed intimidation in the Baton Rouge metropolitan area. The thin one had not moved. He watched Dolan with the watchful, loose quality he'd come in with, and Dolan watched him back and understood that the thin one was the one to watch, which was usually how it worked. The big one looked at Mendez. Call us, he said. You've got the number. I don't have the number, Mendez said. I don't have any numbers. I've been in Angola for 10 years. You'll get the number. He looked at Dolan once more, the look of a man storing information for later, and then they got back in the Tahoe and it pulled out the way it came in, unhurried, and turned back across Airline Highway and was gone. Dolan put his phone in his pocket. His hands were steady because he had trained them to be steady a long time ago, and they reported for that duty even when the rest of him was running calculations about what just happened. You don't have a law license, Mendez said. No. If they check. They'll check, Dolan said. Yeah. Mendez looked at the space where the Tahoe had been. He stood there long enough that a woman pushing a stroller gave them a wide berth on the sidewalk. Then he said, So now they have your face. They had my face from the motel lot. Now they have your face and a reason. He turned toward the Crown Vic. Your AC work? I told you. Partially. How partially? Dolan unlocked the car. Get in. They got in. The AC labored. Across the lot, the Audi had not moved. Dolan started the engine and put it in reverse and thought about the thin one's eyes and the way the big one had said, You've got the number, with the certainty of a man who has never in his life told someone something they didn't eventually confirm. He thought about the card in his shirt pocket with the royal seal of the Kingdom of Spain on it, and the document Cortina had assembled in that attaché, tabbed and bound, built by lawyers over years. He thought about 10 years of bad arithmetic. Where are you staying? Dolan said. I was staying at the Motel 6. You can't go back to the Motel 6. I know that. I've got a contact in Metairie who can. I'm not going to Metairie. Mendez had the burner out again. He looked at the screen. I need 3 days. 3 days to do what? 3 days to do what I came out here to do. He looked at Dolan. The aviators were off now on the dash, and without them his eyes were older and more specific. The eyes of a man who had thought about this day for a long time and was now inside it and finding it both exactly what he'd planned for and nothing like what he'd imagined. You said you're keeping your options open. I said that. What does that mean exactly for a man with no case and no client? Dolan put the car in drive and pulled toward the exit. In the mirror, the Audi moved, pulling out 2 seconds behind him with the discreet professional distance of a surveillance that had stopped pretending to be anything else. He turned onto Airline and headed toward the interstate and said, It means I'm flexible. Mendez looked at the road ahead. He was quiet for 30 seconds, which Dolan had learned in the last 4 hours was not the quiet of a man with nothing to say. I have a boat, Mendez said. Dolan glanced at him. In Empire. South of New Orleans, down the Bayou Road. He said it the way men name things they've been holding on to carefully. I had a friend keep it for me. She's maintained. Fueled. A boat. A salvage vessel. 38 feet, twin diesel, deepwater rated. He paused. I have a crew. A crew, Dolan said. 2 people. People I trust. Dolan drove. The interstate ramp came up, and he took it, and the Crown Vic pointed south toward New Orleans with the Audi behind it. And somewhere back in Baton Rouge, the Tahoe pointed in whatever direction Tahoes pointed when they went to report in. He drove with the windows cracked because the AC was losing the argument with the July afternoon, and the hot air came through with the smell of the river and the refineries and the flat coastal plain baking in the sun. He thought about what it meant that a man had spent 10 years in a federal penitentiary and come out with a boat, a crew, and 3 days' worth of purpose. He thought about what kind of man planned like that. He thought about what kind of man followed that kind of man into a Waffle House on his first morning out, with the Spanish government in the parking lot and the cartel across the street, armed with nothing but a law license he didn't have, and a po' boy from a Gonzales gas station sitting in his stomach. I'm not a boat person, Dolan said. No, Mendez said. I know. I get seasick past the causeway. That's unfortunate. They drove south. In the mirror, the Audi held its distance, patient and expensive, and behind them Baton Rouge gave way to the river parishes, and the sky opened wide and flat, and the egrets stood in the highway median ditches in the heat. Jack, Mendez said. Yeah. Whatever you think you know about why you put me away. He looked at the window. You don't know the half of it. Dolan said nothing. He drove. Literally, Mendez said. And the corner of his mouth moved in a way that was not quite a smile and was not quite not one, and he turned his face back to the window and watched Louisiana move past in the heat like something that had been waiting a long time for both of them to arrive. Chapter 3. The New Orleans Public Library on Loyola Avenue was not air-conditioned so much as it was air-argued with, the system doing its best against a building that had been absorbing Gulf Coast summers since 1958 and had opinions about it. The reading rooms smelled like paper, and the particular coolness of old stone, and something that might have been mildew being managed rather than defeated. Dolan found Mendez on the 3rd floor in the Maritime Law section, which occupied a half shelf between Admiralty procedure and international shipping treaties, and was not a neighborhood of the library that saw a lot of foot traffic. Mendez had a yellow legal pad and 3 books open on the table in front of him, and a pencil behind his ear, and the focused stillness of a man doing graduate work, which was approximately what it was. He did not look up when Dolan sat down across from him. You lost me for 5 days, Dolan said quietly, because it was a library. You found me, Mendez said without looking up. Took me 5 days. I know. I was watching. He made a note on the legal pad. You drive the same route twice when you're looking for something. You should vary that. Dolan looked at the books. One was open to a section on sovereign immunity in maritime salvage disputes. Another to the UNESCO Convention on Underwater Cultural Heritage, 2001. The pages annotated in the margins with a different hand, someone who'd read it before Mendez. The third was a history of Spanish colonial shipping in the Gulf of Mexico, the spine cracked and soft from use. You check this out, Dolan said. They're reference copies. You can't check them out. So you've been here every day. Not every day. Mendez turned a page. There's a copy of the UNESCO Convention text at Tulane Law that has better annotations. I was there Tuesday. Dolan sat back and looked at him. Outside the window, the city went about its business in the heat. A streetcar on St. Charles, pigeons on the library ledge, a man selling water ice from a cart on the sidewalk below. Normal Tuesday in July. Inside, Mendez read Maritime Law, and Dolan tried to work out how a man spent 5 days in New Orleans without a credit card, a known address, 2 government agencies and a cartel outfit looking for him, and left no trace that a reasonably competent private investigator could find. The answer was that he'd planned it. The answer was that he'd planned all of it, or as much of it as a man can plan from inside a federal penitentiary with library privileges and a decade of uninterrupted thinking time. "They're not on you right now," Dolan said. "No." Mendez looked up for the first time. "I timed it. The Audi rents by the week. They renewed Monday, which means they're settled into a rhythm. They have 2 people, which means 6-hour surveillance rotations, which means there's a window mid-morning when the handoff happens and attention drifts." He picked up the pencil and turned it in his fingers. "The Tahoe is more unpredictable. But they're working on information, not surveillance. They're waiting for me to do something they can follow." He paused. "So I've been doing things they can't follow. Reading maritime law in a public library, among other things." They sat with that for a moment. A woman 2 tables over was working through a stack of periodicals with the methodical patience of academic research. The AC vents pushed cool air down in irregular pulses. Somewhere in the stacks a cart squeaked. "I need to ask you something," Dolan said. Mendez set the pencil down. "And I need you to let me finish before you decide what to do with it." "Ask." Dolan put both hands flat on the table and looked at them and then at Mendez. "The arrest," he said. "The case. The 6 months I worked it, and the file I built, and the 3 days in federal court." He stopped. Started again. "I found your dive logs. The real ones, not the falsified manifests we used for the fraud charge. I found them in the 2nd week, and I understood what they meant, and I buried them." Mendez was still. "I logged them as non-evidentiary. Put them in a materials box that went to storage. The case went forward on the fraud charge, and the dive logs never appeared." Dolan looked at his hands. "I told myself I did it because the logs would have complicated the federal case. Because they'd have opened a salvage rights argument that could have got you off." That was true. He looked up. "It was also true that I wanted to be the man who knew. I'd been on the job 22 years, and I'd made good cases and closed them and gone home. And the commendations were in a box in my closet, and none of it added up to the kind of thing you remember. And then I found those logs, and I understood what you'd found out there, and something in me," he stopped. "Something in me held on to it. The knowing. Like it was mine." The woman with the periodicals turned a page. The AC pulsed. "I didn't take anything," Dolan said. "The 2nd cache, whatever you found and didn't report, I never touched it. I didn't know where it was. I still don't." "I know that," Mendez said. "I just held the knowledge. Like leverage I never used." He took his hands off the table. "It wasn't the reason I arrested you. The fraud case was real, and you know it. But it also wasn't not the reason. And I've been," he stopped again. "Carrying it," Mendez said. "Yeah." Mendez looked at him for a long time. The kind of look that is doing actual work, not performing consideration but conducting it. Then he said, "I know what you did with the logs. I've known for 8 years." Dolan said nothing. "My lawyer, my original lawyer before the appeals attorney, she filed a discovery motion in year 2. They sent the materials box. The logs were in it, logged as non-evidentiary." He picked up the pencil again. "She told me an investigator had suppressed potentially exculpatory material and asked if I wanted to pursue it." He turned the pencil. "I told her no." "Why?" Mendez looked at the pencil. "Because if the logs came out in an appeal, the coordinates came out with them. And if the coordinates came out, the location came out. And if the location came out, the cache The cash, Mendez said. The cartel. The Spanish government. Every maritime lawyer and treasure hunter and federal agency with a jurisdictional argument. He set the pencil down, parallel to the legal pad. I needed it to stay buried until I was out. Until I could move. He looked at Dolan. You suppressing the logs kept the location buried for 10 years. It was not what you intended. But it was useful. Dolan sat with this. It had a particular weight to it. The way information has weight when it rearranges 10 years of interior architecture. I cost you 10 years, Dolan said. Yes. And your decision to stay quiet cost you the appeal that might have shortened it. Also yes. So we both made choices, Mendez said. For reasons that made sense to us at the time, and were not entirely clean. He looked at the maritime law book. Welcome to the human condition, Jack. It's a long stay, and the lodgings are inconsistent. Dolan almost laughed. He didn't quite. I'm sorry, he said. For the part one owned. Mendez nodded once, the nod of a man receiving something he had expected and had already decided what to do with. He did not say it was all right, because it had not been all right. He did not say it was forgiven, because that was a larger word than the moment called for. He just received it and set it somewhere, and moved forward, which was what he did, apparently, with most things. I need to tell you what this is, Mendez said. All right. Not all of it. Not yet. But enough that you understand what you're deciding when you decide whether to stay in the room. I'm in the room. You don't know what room it is yet. Dolan gestured at the maritime law shelf. I've got a pretty good idea. Mendez talked for 40 minutes. He talked in the low, even tone of a man who has rehearsed the telling not to make it smooth, but to make it accurate, to find the sequence in which the facts make the most honest sense. Dolan listened the way he had listened to 1,000 witness statements, without interrupting, without reacting, tracking the internal logic, testing it against what he already knew, and marking the places where it held and the places where it asked him to take something on faith. It held mostly. The part Dolan had known, or had known the shape of without the detail, the wreck site. The Santa Catalina de Alejandría. 60 miles offshore in the Gulf, in a trough at 140 feet, found by a combination of archival research in Seville and Havana, and 18 months of methodical survey work in a stretch of water that most salvage operators had written off as blank. The cargo manifest, the real one, the one that matched what Mendez found on the wreck, was not what the Spanish government's lawyers argued in federal court. It was not what the colonial shipping records at the Archive of the Indies in Seville recorded. They falsified the manifest, Dolan said. In 1591, Mendez said. 4 years after the ship went down. The Crown was in debt to the Habsburg banking families, and the cargo was partially collateral. If the Crown acknowledged the true value of the loss, it triggered repayment obligations. He kept his voice level. So they reduced the cargo on paper. Filed an insurance claim on the reduced amount with the Colonial Fund. Collected. The real cargo stayed on the bottom of the Gulf and became nobody's problem for 430 years. Until you. Until me. He looked at the legal pad. The second part is what you don't know. This was the part Dolan had been waiting for. He did not move. The cargo of the Santa Catalina was loaded in Veracruz, Mendez said. Summer of 1587. The gold, the coins, and the ingots were struck at the Mexico City Mint. But the silver came from Zacatecas, and the labor that moved it from the mines to the mint to the port. He stopped. Not for effect. Because the next sentence had weight, he was deciding how to carry. The community that provided that labor was never compensated. Not in 1587, not when the ship went down, not when the Crown filed its false manifest. There was a community in the Veracruz highlands, indigenous, agricultural, pressed into service under the encomienda system, that spent 2 years moving the treasure that went on that ship. They got nothing. Their descendants are still in the Veracruz highlands. They are not wealthy. Dolan looked at him. I found this in Seville, Mendez said. In the Archive of the Indies. The labor records from the mint and the port. Names. Community names. A petition filed in 1589 by the community's leaders to the colonial audiencia, asking for compensation for the conscripted labor on the 1587 shipment. The petition was denied. The record of denial is in the same archive as the falsified manifest. He paused. No one had connected them before, because no one had reason to look at both. Until you. I'm very good at archives, Mendez said without particular pride. It's the thing I am second best at. What are you best at? Being underwater. Dolan sat back. The AC pushed a pulse of cool air down, and he felt it on the back of his neck and thought about what Mendez had just told him, and what it meant for what came next. You want to return it, he said. To the community. To the trust that represents them. There's a woman, Dolores Bautista Reyes. 71 years old. She's been building the legal and historical case for the community's claim for 20 years. She has documentation. He touched the legal pad. I've been in correspondence with her organization for 6 years. Through an intermediary, obviously. Through a priest in Coyoacán, who has been the most patient man I have ever communicated with. Through a priest in Coyoacán, Dolan said. While you were in Angola. Library access, Mendez said. And a very understanding chaplain who was willing to forward correspondence that looked like parish newsletter material. He let that sit there. I'm not a religious man, but I've become a great admirer of institutional mail. Dolan looked at him. He looked at the Maritime Law Book, and the UNESCO Convention, and the yellow legal pad covered in the close, precise handwriting of a man who had spent a decade doing serious homework. He thought about the Spanish government's lawyers and their filed briefs and the cartel's shell company, and the federal evidence locker holding $500 million worth of colonial silver and gold. He thought about a petition filed in 1589 in Veracruz that nobody connected to a false manifest until a Portuguese-born deep-sea diver went to an archive in Seville and started asking the right questions. He thought about what kind of man that was. The cartel money, Dolan said. Yes. They financed the operation, expecting a return. A substantial one. I needed the equipment and the permits, and I needed a crew I didn't have to explain the full picture to. The cartel financing came through a shell company. I dealt with one intermediary, and he dealt with someone I never met. I knew what they were. I needed what they had. He looked at Dolan steadily. It was a transaction I made with clear eyes and have thought about every day since. And the return they were expecting was never going to happen the way they expected it. He paused. That's a problem I have been aware of. That's a problem, Dolan said, that has a Tahoe and at least 4 men attached to it. At least, Mendez agreed. And a fixer. The 2 men in the lot, they were road soldiers. Someone sent road soldiers, which means someone also sent someone to manage the road soldiers. Mendez nodded slowly. I assumed. His name is Voss. Gerardo Voss. I ran him after the parking lot. Dolan kept his voice at library volume. Half German, grew up in Veracruz. Mendez went still in a way that was different from his usual stillness. Specific. You know the name, Dolan said. I know the city. He looked at the table. A fixer from Veracruz. Somebody's sense of humor is working fine. He's not from the community, if that's what you're. No. No, nothing like that. He picked up the pencil again. Turned it. It's just, the city keeps showing up. The way places do, in a story. Dolan watched him. There's something else. There is always something else. The U.S. Attorney's Office, Dolan said. I have a contact at NOPD, my former partner. She called me 2 days ago. The federal case is open again. Not formally reopened. Quiet. Someone in the Southern District is pulling the original files and asking questions about material that was logged as non-evidentiary. Mendez set the pencil down. The materials box, Dolan said. Someone's looking at the materials box. The silence between them had a different quality now. Not the silence of two men being careful. The silence of two men who have just understood that the timeline has moved. How long? Mendez said. My contact said the file pulls started 3 weeks ago. Dolan looked at him. Before you got out. Someone in the Southern District anticipated my release and started working the old file. That's what the timing says. Mendez looked at the maritime law book. He closed it with the careful hand of a man who respects borrowed things. Then he closed the UNESCO convention. Then, the colonial shipping history. He stacked them neatly at the edge of the table for the librarian to reshelve. He tore the top 3 pages from the yellow legal pad, folded them twice, and put them in his shirt pocket. He capped the pencil and put it back in the cup on the table where he'd found it. You've been following me since Angola, he said. Yes. Nobody hired you. No. And now you're sitting in a library, telling me the federal government is sniffing around a materials box that could produce evidence I have standing to argue was improperly handled. He looked at Dolan. By you. By me, Dolan said. Which means if the case reopens formally, you have exposure. Some. And you came and told me anyway. Dolan said nothing. Mendez studied him with the flat dark eyes. Outside the window, the city moved in the heat, indifferent and beautiful and old in the specific way of cities built on water, always half negotiating with the ground beneath them, always working out the terms of their own survival. A pigeon landed on the ledge and looked in and found nothing of interest and left. What do you need from me? Mendez said. I need to know what you're going to do next, Dolan said. Not all of it. Enough. Why? Because 3 groups of people are going to make very stupid decisions very fast. The cartel, because they think the clock is running on their investment. The Spanish, because the federal file activity will get back to them, and they'll think the window on their recovery offer is closing. And the feds because, he stopped. Because someone in the Southern District started pulling files 3 weeks before your release, and that's not routine. That's someone who thinks they know something. Do they? I don't know what they know. I know what's in the materials box. He looked at Mendez. Which is enough to ask questions nobody's going to like the answers to. Mendez was quiet. A cart squeaked through the stacks behind them. The woman with the periodicals gathered her materials and left with the quiet efficiency of the genuinely focused. The boat, Mendez said finally. The one in Empire. I'm going down in 4 days. The crew is ready. The equipment is staged. He looked at the table where the books had been. I need 4 days here and then it moves. What do you need for the 4 days? Mendez looked at him with the expression of a man who is making a decision he has been moving toward for longer than the conversation. I need someone who isn't connected to any of the 3 groups, he said. Someone with law enforcement instincts and no current law enforcement standing, which means no jurisdiction and no obligation to report. He paused. Someone who drives a car that nobody has associated with me yet. They have your face from the motel lot. They have your face. They don't know your car. He tilted his head slightly. Yet. I also have no law license, a partial air conditioner, and I haven't been paid. I'm aware. Just so we're clear on the full picture. Crystal, Mendez said. He stood and picked up his jacket from the chair back and put it on with the precise movements of a man who has learned not to leave things places. He looked at Dolan. There's a place on Magazine Street. Creole restaurant, been there since the 90s. They do a red beans and rice on Tuesday that is better than anything you've had this year. It's Thursday. They do it Thursday too. He moved toward the stairs. Come on. I'll explain the parts one can explain. He paused at the end of the shelf. And Jack. Dolan stood. Get a different car for the next 4 days. Something boring. Something nobody looks at. The Crown Vic is boring. The Crown Vic is a retired police vehicle. Every criminal in Louisiana looks at it automatically. He considered. Rent something gray. Something that Honda makes. I'm not going to expense a rental to a non-existent case. I'll pay for the rental. With what? You walked out of Angola with $40. Mendez reached into his jacket pocket and produced a Visa card. He held it up for a moment, not showing off, just answering the question, and put it back. Angola has a financial services program, he said. I've been saving since 2015. Dolan looked at where the card had been. How much did you save? Enough for a gray Honda, Mendez said, and walked toward the stairs. Dolan followed him down through the library's cool stone interior, past the reference desk and the periodical section, and the reading rooms where people sat with their serious civilian purposes, and out through the glass doors into the full force of a New Orleans July afternoon, which hit like a verdict. Somewhere on Loyola Avenue, the Audi was parked. Or it wasn't. The timing window Mendez had mapped, the 6-hour surveillance rotation, the mid-morning handoff drift. Maybe they were between watchers. Maybe the timing was exactly what Mendez said it was, because he was exactly the kind of man who would time it to the rotation. Dolan squinted at the street. The water ice cart was still on the corner. The streetcar bell rang somewhere down St. Charles. Magazine Street, he said. Red beans and rice, Mendez said. Tuesday recipe. Trust me. They walked south toward the quarter and the river. Two men on a Thursday afternoon in New Orleans with no visible reason to be together, which was the best reason in the world. Chapter 4. You went through my office, Dolan said. Corinne stood in the doorway with her reading glasses pushed up on her forehead, like a second set of eyes that had given up. Behind her, the filing cabinet in the corner listed open, its drawers pulled and not pushed back. The desk surface, normally its own geological record of unpaid invoices and cold case notes and takeout menus, had been reorganized by someone with neither knowledge of the system nor interest in developing one. I came in this morning and found it, she said. Don't look at me like that. Dolan walked past her into the office. He checked the desk first, then the cabinet, then crouched and looked under the desk at the floor safe, which was closed and locked and showed no scratches around the dial. He stood and looked at the window. The latch on the lower sash was pushed to the side, not broken, which meant someone who knew how old New Orleans window hardware worked and had taken a thin blade to it from outside. They didn't go for the safe, he said. What's in the safe? Nothing relevant. He crossed to the window and studied the paint on the sill, 2 faint scuff marks fresh from something rubber-soled. Someone had come in from the street side at night, worked the latch, gone through the desk and the cabinet, and left the way they came. They were looking for paper. Case files. Anything with Mendes's name on it. The Mendes file, Corinne said. There is no Mendes file. There's no Mendes file because I didn't open a case, Dolan said. There's nothing to find. He turned away from the window. Call the building's insurance line, not the police. Tell them it was a burglary, nothing taken. Get the window latch fixed today, not tomorrow. Corinne studied him from the doorway with the expression she reserved for conversations where she had decided to collect information rather than dispense it. Jack. Yeah. Are you in trouble? He considered giving her a useful answer. Not yet, he said. She absorbed this. The man you went to Angola to watch. I didn't say I went to Angola. You took the thermos and came back Thursday smelling like Baton Rouge and a Waffle House, which is a specific combination. You've been out every day since in that gray Honda that is parked downstairs and is not your car. She folded her arms. I'm 73 years old, and I've been watching you lie to people for 11 years. You're not in my weight class. Dolan moved toward the door, and she stepped back to let him out. In the hallway, he stopped. If anyone comes asking about me, anyone at all, badge or no badge, you haven't seen me since Tuesday. You don't know about the Honda. You don't know anything about any case. I don't know anything about any case, she repeated, with the intonation of a woman who knows everything about every case. Fine. But the rent? 2 weeks, he said. You said Thursday. 2 weeks from Thursday. He went down the stairs and out onto Decatur Street and into the full broadside of a Gulf Coast afternoon, the kind that comes off the river in August carrying everything the river carries, heat and commerce and the smell of something that has traveled a long way to get here. He got into the gray Honda Civic that Mendes's visa had rented from the airport Hertz and drove toward the quarter. His phone rang before he cleared the first block. Dolan. The voice on the other end belonged to Lieutenant Yvonne Theroux of the NOPD, his former partner, currently the most competent law enforcement officer he knew, and the one most entitled to be irritated with him. Where are you? Decatur Street. Stay there. A pause. Actually, don't stay there. Go somewhere a cruiser won't notice the car you're driving that is not your car. Then call me back. He parked on a side street off Chartres, in the shadow of a building that had been doing business of one kind or another since the 1820s, and called her back. Your office got tossed, Theroux said. I know. I was just there. Professional job. Whoever did it knew about the window latch. Old building. There are people who know these buildings. There are also people who case a building before they enter it, which means they've been watching your office, which means they know your patterns, which means they know I'm in a different car, Dolan said. Yes. I figured. A silence on the line that had the texture of a woman deciding how much to say. The federal file activity I told you about, Theroux said. It accelerated. The Southern District pulled the full materials inventory 2 days ago. Not just the box, the complete evidence log from the original case. Another pause. Someone in that office is building something, Jack. I don't know what, and I don't know who, but it's not routine. Routine doesn't pull a 10-year-old evidence log the week a man gets released. No, Dolan said. It doesn't. You need to tell me how far into this you are. He watched a cat cross the side street and disappear under a parked truck with the deliberateness of an animal that has concluded the human world is not its department. Far enough that I'd rather not say on the phone. Then come see me. Tonight. Not the precinct. Bacchanal, she said. 9 o'clock. I'll be the one drinking something sensible. She hung up. Dolan sat in the Honda and thought about the office window and the rubber-soled scuffs on the paint, and whether the Tahoe crew or the Spanish agents or the federal interest had gotten there first, and concluded that the answer mattered less than the fact that all three now knew he existed and had made a choice to be in the room where this was happening. He started the car and drove toward the warehouse district, where Mendez was not staying at any address Dolan could have named if asked. Voss had taken an office. This was the thing about Gerardo Voss that Dolan had not yet understood and was now beginning to. He was not a man who operated out of cars and back rooms. He had rented a suite on the 14th floor of a Canal Street hotel, the kind of hotel that catered to oil company consultants and international arbitration lawyers, the kind where the lobby had fresh flowers daily, and the front desk staff had been trained to treat all guests with identical, impenetrable courtesy. He had business cards printed. They described him as a consultant in maritime asset recovery, which was accurate in the way that all the best lies are accurate. Dolan learned this from a source he'd cultivated during his NOPD years, a hotel security contractor named Primo, who supplemented his income by supplementing Dolan's information, a relationship they both understood without ever naming it. Primo texted the suite number and a single sentence, 2 support staff. 1 driver. 1 woman with a laptop who has not left the room. The woman with a laptop who had not left the room was, Dolan suspected, the actual intelligence operation. The rest was furniture. He did not go near the hotel. Instead, he drove to Empire, Louisiana, which required taking Highway 23 south out of New Orleans down the west bank of the Mississippi into Plaquemines Parish, where the land narrowed between the river and the Gulf, and the highway ran straight and flat through marsh grass and oil infrastructure, and the occasional elevated house that had learned from experience what the water could do. Empire sat at the end of a stretch of road that felt, in the coastal afternoon light, like the last argument for dry land before the Gulf made its counterpoint. The marina at Empire held working boats, shrimp trawlers, charter fishing vessels, a couple of utility boats for the pipeline service companies. The Segunda Oportunidad sat in the third slip from the end, a 38-foot salvage vessel in working trim, her hull dark blue, the deck hardware functional and maintained without vanity. She looked like what she was, a serious boat operated by serious people for serious purposes. Dolan parked and walked the dock and found Mendez on the afterdeck in conversation with 2 people he hadn't met yet. The first was a woman, middle 40s, built for physical work, not bulky but load-bearing, the kind of strength that lives in the back and the shoulders. She had her hair pulled back and wore a welding burn scar on her left forearm like a signature. She was going over something on a clipboard with the focus of a person whose tolerance for imprecision had been burned away by whatever she'd done before this. The second was a smaller man, maybe 60, with a face that had spent decades at sea and looked like it, deep-lined, salt-bleached, permanently narrowed at the eyes. He had 8 fingers. Dolan counted from habit. He was coiling rope with the automatic efficiency of someone who has coiled rope 10,000 times and stopped thinking about it somewhere around attempt 2000. Mendez saw Dolan on the dock and said something to the woman, too low to carry, and she glanced up and assessed him in about half a second with the expression of someone who has been briefed and reserves judgment as a policy. The 8-fingered man did not look up from the rope. "My office got tossed," Dolan said, stepping aboard. "When?" Mendez said. "Last night. Professional entry, no damage, nothing taken." He nodded at the 2 crew members. "These are your people?" "Dessa," Mendez said, indicating the woman. "She does structural and mechanical. Anything that involves metal and heat." Dessa nodded once, no warmth, no hostility, the nod of someone categorizing incoming data. "El Pulpo," Mendez said, indicating the rope coiler, who still had not looked up. "El Pulpo," Dolan said. "Don't ask about the fingers," Dessa said. "He'll tell you, and it takes 45 minutes. It's a good story, El Pulpo said, still coiling. It is, Dessa said. Once. Mendez moved toward the cabin door. Come below. The cabin was orderly, in the way of spaces where the person responsible understands that disorder is a form of danger. Charts on the table waited at the corners. Equipment manifests in a binder. 2 laptops, lids down, cables coiled and secured. A marine radio mounted in the corner, its green power light steady. The smell of diesel and salt and something cooking, rice maybe, or something with rice in it, from a small galley forward. Mendez sat across the chart table, and Dolan sat opposite, and they were close enough that the conversation didn't need to be loud. The office entry is Voss, Mendez said. Not the Spanish. The agents would have gone through channels, a subpoena, a federal records request. They work inside frameworks. He traced a finger along the edge of the chart without touching it. Voss works outside frameworks. He's on Canal Street, Dolan said. Hotel suite. He's got support staff, and someone running intelligence from a laptop. Mendez received this with the stillness of a man who has stopped being surprised by how prepared his problems are. How long has he been there? My source said 3 days. He arrived while I was, Dolan stopped. While we were at the library. He flew in after the parking lot, Mendez said. The road soldiers reported back, and the operation scaled up. He leaned back against the bulkhead. Gerardo Voss is from Veracruz. Did I mention that? You mentioned the city keeps showing up. He grew up in the port district. His father worked the docks. Mendez's voice stayed neutral, but something behind it was doing heavier work. He's been in this business 20 years. He is very good at it, and he has no more connection to the Veracruz community than a shipping container does. He paused. But the geography bothers me. A fixer from the port city where the Santa Catalina was loaded, sent to recover what the Santa Catalina was carrying. He pressed 2 fingers against the chart table. Somebody's sense of structure is very tidy. Or it's coincidence. I don't use that word about things that can kill me. Fair, Dolan thought. He crossed his arms and studied the chart on the table. Gulf of Mexico, the Louisiana and Mississippi coasts, the offshore bathymetric lines showing depth in fathoms. His eye found the rough area 60 miles out and held it. Open water. Nothing to distinguish it from the Gulf on either side, except what sat at the bottom. The federal file pull, Dolan said. My NOPD contact says it accelerated. They've got the full evidence inventory now, not just the materials box. Mendez held his gaze. Not the flat assessment he'd been running since Angola, but something more direct, more calculating. Who in the Southern District? She doesn't know yet. Someone anticipated my release by weeks. That's not a junior attorney covering bases. That's someone with a theory and enough standing to act on it. He moved the chart binder 2 inches to align it with the table edge. Not fussiness, just a hand needing somewhere to go. Could be someone from the original prosecution team. Could be someone who's been sitting on a question for 10 years and decided my release was the moment to ask it. There was an ASA on the original case, Dolan said. Bertrand Foy. He retired in 2019. But he had a clerk who went on to the Southern District. He stopped. Ambitious kid. I remember him from the grand jury proceedings. He had questions then that the case didn't fully answer. What kind of questions? The kind that suggest he'd read the materials inventory more carefully than anyone expected. Dolan pulled at the corner of his mouth. He had a look on his face during the sentencing. I've been thinking about that look for 10 years. What kind of look? The look of a man who thinks the room doesn't know what he knows. Dolan considered. His name is Garrett Hollis. He's an Asa now. Has been for 4 years. Mendez was quiet for a moment. Through the hull, Dolan could hear El Pulpo moving on the deck above, the soft percussion of work being done by someone who knows how to do it. The marine radio murmured Coast Guard traffic at low volume. "So we have," Mendez said, counting with his fingers, not dramatically but as a man taking inventory, Voss and his support operation on Canal Street. 2 Spanish heritage agents working surveillance rotations. An Asa who has been sitting on a 10-year-old question and just started asking it. He paused at 3. And a retired NOPD detective who suppressed material evidence and has been following me since Angola in a car that doesn't belong to him. "I prefer to think of myself as an asset," Dolan said. "I'm sure you do." From the galley, something with rice made a decisive sound. Dessa's voice carried forward. 30 minutes. "She cooks," Dolan said. "Everyone cooks on a working boat," Mendez said. "It's in the charter." "There's an actual charter." "There's an actual charter." He stood and moved to the small porthole above the chart table and checked the dock without obvious purpose. Old habit, same as Dolan's, different training. "We move in 3 days. South and offshore, then east along the shelf. The dive site is," he stopped. "Started differently. You'll know the coordinates when we're underway. Not before. You still don't trust me." "I trust you more than I trusted you a week ago. That's real progress." He turned from the porthole. "But trust is not the issue. The issue is that you cannot tell someone something you don't know. If Voss's people decide to have another conversation with you before we leave, I'd hold. I know you'd hold." He said it without condescension, which made it land differently than it might have. "But you'd be holding under conditions that are unpleasant and extended, and the information isn't worth that to you the way it is to me." He looked at Dolan. "I'm not keeping the coordinates from you because I don't trust you. I'm keeping them from you because I care about whether you have a bad few days." Dolan sat with this. It was, he decided, the most direct expression of concern he'd received from anyone in the past 3 years, which said something about the state of his personal life that he chose not to examine in the cabin of a salvage vessel in Empire, Louisiana. 3 days, he said. 3 days. I need to complete the equipment check and file the float plan, a false one which Dessa handles. She has a system. I need one more trip to the city for materials. And I need the Spanish agents to settle into their routine enough that when we leave, they don't flag the departure until we're well south. He looked at the chart. Once we're in open water, the calculus changes. Voss can't operate offshore the way he operates on land. The agents need Coast Guard cooperation to intercept, and that takes time. He pressed a finger to the bathymetric lines. Open water is mine. I've been operating in open water for 30 years. And me, Dolan said. And you. He looked at him. You said you get seasick past the causeway. I said that. Do you have medication? I'll get medication. Get the patch, not the pill. The pill takes too long. He moved toward the galley. Stay for dinner. Dessa's red beans are better than anything on Magazine Street, and I should not have told you the Magazine Street place was the best because I was establishing trust and I oversold it. Dolan blinked. You oversold the red beans. I needed you to come. So the whole. The restaurant was real. The red beans were good. Dessa's are better. He ducked toward the galley. Consider it a rounding error. Dolan looked at the chart, and the porthole, and the marine radio with its murmuring Coast Guard traffic, and thought about a man who had spent a decade in a federal penitentiary building a plan with the precision of a watchmaker, and had also apparently been quietly ranking red beans and rice operations across Orleans Parish as part of the preparation. He did not know whether to find this reassuring or unnerving. He settled on both. Bacchanal Wine on Poland Avenue sat at the edge of the bywater with its back to the river, a wine shop that had grown a rear courtyard and a live music stage, and a kitchen that operated out of a trailer, because New Orleans had never been particularly interested in the conventional sequencing of things. Thoreau was at a table near the far wall of the courtyard when Dolan arrived at 9:05, with a glass of something white and a folder she had not opened yet, which meant she was waiting for him to sit before deciding how much of it he needed to see. He ordered bourbon at the bar and carried it over and sat, and she gave him the look she'd been giving him since their third month as partners 20 years ago, the look that meant she'd already done the math and was waiting for him to catch up. "Garrett Hollis," Dolan said. She didn't move. "How did you get there?" "I remembered his face from the grand jury. And I spent the drive back from Empire thinking about who in the Southern District would have a 10-year-old question about a materials log." Thoreau drank her wine. She was 53 and wore authority the way some people wear well-made clothes, not for effect but because it fit. She'd made lieutenant on merit in a department that had not always been interested in making things easy for her, and the combination had produced someone with very little patience for performance of any kind. "Hollis has been building a file," she said. "Not officially. Side drawer stuff. He's been doing it since 2018. "What triggered it?" "The Spanish government filed their first federal claim in 2017. It failed, but it kicked up enough paperwork that someone in the Southern District did a background review of all connected cases." She rotated the wine glass on the table. "Hollis was doing admin work that year, and he pulled the original Mendez file as part of the review. He went through the materials log and found the dive logs, non-evidentiary, logged by you, and he filed a query with the case supervisor asking why they'd been excluded. And the case supervisor was 3 months from retirement and told him the case was closed and to focus on his current docket." She looked at him over the glass. "So he focused on his current docket. And he kept a copy of the query in a side drawer and has been adding to it ever since." Dolan drank his bourbon. The band in the corner was working through something that involved a trumpet and a lot of earnest disagreement between the trumpet and the bass line. The courtyard smelled like jasmine and cigarettes and river air. "He's going to move," Dolan said. "Not immediately. He needs the evidence log review to produce something he can take to a supervisor. But he's been patient for 8 years. He'll know how to time it." "He's already timed it," Thoreau said. She opened the folder. 1 page, a printout, not a formal document. She pushed it across the table. "He filed a motion 2 days ago in the Southern District requesting a formal review of the non-evidentiary materials from the original Mendez case. A judge signed it this morning." Dolan looked at the page. "He moved before he had the logs. He moved on the theory that the logs exist and that they were improperly excluded. He's asking the court to determine whether the exclusion affected the outcome of the original trial." She held his gaze. "If the court agrees, Jack, that's a wrongful conviction review. And if it's a wrongful conviction review—" "I'm in the middle of it," Dolan said. "I logged them, non-evidentiary. I'm the one who made the call." "Yes." He set the bourbon down and looked at the printout and understood that the timeline he'd been operating on, Mendez's 3 days, the boat, the offshore run, had just been compressed by something he hadn't moved fast enough to prevent. Hollis had filed 2 days ago. A judge had signed this morning. The Southern District's investigative machinery was now in motion, and it ground at a pace that did not respond to what he needed it to do. Does he know Mendez is in the city? Dolan said. He knows Mendez was released. He'll assume Mendez is in Louisiana. She closed the folder. He'll also know, or figure out, that a wrongful conviction review gives Mendez standing to petition for access to the original evidence, including the dive logs. She paused. Including whatever the dive logs point to. The coordinates, Dolan said. If they're in the logs, they're in the logs. Thoreau was quiet for a moment. The trumpet and the bass resolved their disagreement in favor of the trumpet. A table of tourists near the entrance laughed at something and raised their glasses. I'm going to ask you one question, she said. And I need a real answer. All right. Is what Mendez is doing going to hurt anyone? Dolan thought about the library, and the yellow legal pad, and the 1589 petition from Veracruz that had sat in the archive of the Indies for 430 years. He thought about Dolores Bautista Reyes, 71 years old, building a legal case for 20 years. He thought about Dessa's burn scar, and El Pulpo's 8 fingers, and a salvage vessel called the Segunda Oportunidad, sitting in its slip at Empire with its charts weighted and its equipment checked. No, he said. And you. I'm going to have a very uncomfortable conversation with the Southern District at some point, Dolan said. But no, not anyone else. She held his gaze. Then she reached into the folder and slid out a second page and pushed it across. It was a cell number, handwritten. Hollis called me yesterday. He knows we were partners. He wanted background on you. She looked at the number. I told him you were difficult but honest, which is the most useful thing anyone has ever said about you. He gave me his direct number. She tapped the page. If the situation changes, and you need to bring him in from a position of some control rather than none, that's how you do it. Dolan folded the page and put it in his shirt pocket. What did you tell him about the case? I told him I hadn't spoken to you in 3 weeks. She drained the last of her wine. Which was true when I said it. She stood and gathered the folder, and looked down at him with the expression she saved for conversations that had moved past the point where she could officially know what she knew. 3 days, Jack. Whatever is happening, it needs to happen in 3 days. I know. And Jack. She pulled her jacket off the chair back. Get the seasickness patch. Not the pill. He stared up at her. How do you? I know you, she said, and walked back through the bacchanal courtyard toward the street, past the trumpet player who had clearly won, past the tourists with their raised glasses, past the jazzman that had been climbing that wall since before either of them was on the job. Dolan sat with his bourbon and the folded cell number in his pocket, and the sound of the river 2 blocks away, doing what the river always did, which was move south without consulting anyone about it. 3 days. He finished the bourbon and left cash on the table and walked out into the bywater night, which smelled like the river and old brick and something frying somewhere, and the faint diesel trace of a working city that had never fully decided whether it was sinking or floating, and had concluded that the distinction was perhaps less important than the living. His phone buzzed. A text from a number he didn't recognize, no name, room 1407. Come alone. Bring the logs if you have them. G.V. Dolan stood on Poland Avenue and looked at the text and understood that Gerardo Voss, who had a woman with a laptop who had not left the hotel room in 3 days, had been watching Bacchanal wine and had seen him come out and had decided that the moment for a direct conversation had arrived. He put the phone in his pocket and thought about 3 days and the Segunda Oportunidad in its slip at Empire and what Mendez had said about open water being his. Then he thought about room 1407 and what a man like Voss was willing to do inside a Canal Street hotel in a city that had seen considerably worse and hadn't particularly flinched. He started walking. Chapter 5. Room 1407 was on the river side of the hotel, which meant Voss had paid for the view and gotten it, the Mississippi bending south below the window, in the amber glow of the port, container ships at anchor, the lights of Algiers on the far bank strung low along the water. It was the kind of room that did a lot of the work for you before anyone opened their mouth. Dolan had not called ahead. He'd walked in through the lobby at 9:40, nodded at the front desk with the easy confidence of a man returning to his room, and taken the elevator to 14. The door to 1407 was propped open a quarter inch. He pushed it with 2 fingers and stayed in the frame. Voss sat in an armchair near the window with a glass of something amber and no ice, and his jacket on despite the hour. Mid-50s, silver-haired in a way that looked engineered rather than lived, with a face that had been handsome long enough to have developed opinions about it. He gestured at the chair across from him without standing. "Mr. Dolan, sit down. I'm fine here. You walked 12 blocks to stand in a doorway." "I walked to see what the room looked like before I committed to it." Voss absorbed this and made a small sound that acknowledged the point. He gestured again. Not imperious, just a man who preferred people seated because it was easier to read them. Dolan came in and left the door ajar and took the chair that gave him an angle on the bathroom hallway and the window both. The woman with the laptop was gone. Either she'd been moved or she never existed in the form Primo described, and Primo had not been wrong about a room configuration in 11 years of supplemental income, so Dolan filed her absence under deliberate and moved on. "No staff," Dolan said. "I find staff complicates conversations." Voss crossed one leg over the other. His shoes were English and recently resoled. "Drink?" "I had one." "One is a floor, not a ceiling." He tilted his head toward the minibar. "There's Elijah Craig. Someone told me you drank it." "Someone told you?" "I know things about people I'm interested in. It's efficient." He waited. "It's also meant as a courtesy, not a threat. Though I understand if the distinction is hard to land at this hour." Dolan went to the minibar and found the Craig and opened it and poured it into one of the hotel glasses and came back and sat. If Voss had wanted to do something physical, he'd had 3 cleaner chances already tonight. The drink was what it appeared to be, a man who wanted to talk and understood that drinks helped people talk. "You were at Bacchanal," Dolan said. "My driver was. I was here." Voss turned the amber glass in his hand without drinking from it. "Your former partner is a careful woman. She left separately from you by 6 minutes and went back to her car by a different street. That's training. It's habit. Same thing, eventually." He set the glass on the arm of the chair. "I want to explain something to you, Mr. Dolan, because I think you've constructed a picture of me that is serviceable but incomplete, and incomplete pictures produce bad decisions." "Go ahead." "The organization I represent has a financial interest in Rafael Mendes's activities. This is documented, it is contractual, and it is not something Mendes disputes. He entered the agreement knowingly and the terms were clear." He paused, not for effect, but in the way of a man selecting language with precision. "What I am not is the kind of man who harms people unnecessarily. The 2 individuals in Baton Rouge, the parking lot, were blunt instruments deployed before I arrived. I would not have deployed them that way." "How would you have deployed them?" "The way I'm deploying myself now. With a bottle of Elijah Craig and a conversation." He finally drank. "I'm a businessman, Mr. Dolan. I recover investments. What Mendes found on that wreck represents a contractual return on capital that my principals have waited 10 years to realize. I intend to realize it." And if Mendes has other plans for it, then Mendes and I need to reach an accommodation. He set the glass down again. Which is where you become useful. Dolan held the bourbon and did not drink it yet. Through the window, the river moved south, indifferent and enormous, carrying everything it always carried. You think I have access to him, Dolan said. I think you've had access to him since Angola. The motel, the Waffle House, wherever he's been the last 4 days. Voss tilted his head. You're not a man who follows someone for sentiment. You have a reason. Maybe I'm writing a book. Retired detectives who write books do it from their kitchens. They don't rent Hondas and drive to Empire. He let that sit. I'm not interested in your reason. I'm interested in your access. What's the accommodation you're proposing? Voss unfolded from the chair and moved to the window, not away from Dolan but toward the view, a man thinking through glass. Below, a tugboat moved upriver against the current, its running lights patient red and green in the dark. My principals invested $300,000 in Mendes's operation in 2013. The standard return on that class of venture investment, he broke off. I understand the Santa Catalina's manifest values the cargo at $650 million. My principals believe a reasonable recovery fee represents 4% of that. 4%. Dolan ran the arithmetic. $26 million. Which I would argue is generous given the contractual terms, which specified a 30% return on investment. 30% of 650 is nearly 200 million. Yes. Voss turned from the window. I'm offering 4%. That is not a threat. That is a settlement. Dolan drank the bourbon. It was good bourbon, which was annoying under the circumstances. And if Mendes doesn't want to settle. Voss was quiet for a moment. Below the window, the tugboat had cleared the bend. The river held its amber glow, the port lights doubling themselves on the water. Then the situation becomes more complicated, he said. For everyone. Including me. You're already in it, Mr. Dolan. You made that choice in a Baton Rouge parking lot when you put your car into the back of my associate's vehicle. He moved back to the chair but stayed standing. I'm offering you a cleaner position. Talk to Mendes. Explain the arithmetic. $26 million, and my principals close the file. And the cartel enforcers who grabbed me out of a warehouse in Kenner. Something moved across Voss's face, not surprise but a recalibration. Fast and controlled, a man absorbing new data and updating his position in real time. Kenner, he said. Week before last. Van, zip ties, a warehouse that smelled like machine oil and bad intentions. Dolan set the bourbon glass on the side table. Those weren't your people. No, Voss said, and his voice had changed register slightly, quieter, more deliberate. They were not. So there's another player. There may be a faction within my principal's organization that has decided not to wait for my approach. He said it with the controlled displeasure of a man discovering that his authority has been worked around. This is not sanctioned. How unsanctioned? Enough that I'd like to know who gave the order. He studied Dolan now with something sharper than the earlier courteous assessment. Were you hurt? Bruised? Nothing structural. Mendes got away clean. Voss turned back to the window and stood there with his hands clasped behind his back, a man recalculating in real time. Whatever the meeting had been designed to accomplish, it had just become something else, a negotiation that had acquired an additional party neither of them had planned for. I need 24 hours, Voss said finally, before you speak to Mendes about the accommodation. Give me 24 hours to determine the scope of the unsanctioned activity. Why would I do that? Because if there are people operating outside my authority who are willing to put a retired NOPD detective in zip ties in a Kenner warehouse, they are considerably more willing to do the same to Mendez. He turned. And because I suspect you care whether Mendez makes it to wherever he's going, which means you and I have a shared interest in understanding who else is in the field. Dolan stood. You don't know where he's going. I know he has a boat in Empire. I know the boat is crewed and provisioned. Voss picked up his glass again. I don't know the destination. Which is, frankly, the first time in this investigation I've had a gap I couldn't close. Good, Dolan said. He walked to the door. Behind him Voss said without turning from the window, 24 hours, Mr. Dolan. I'll think about it. While you're thinking, the Asa Hollis. He filed his motion 2 days ago. You know this already. A pause. What you may not know is that he's requested an emergency hearing. The judge set it for Thursday morning. Dolan stopped at the door. Thursday, Voss said, is in 40 hours. Dolan went out and rode the elevator down and walked through the lobby with its fresh flowers and its impenetrable front desk courtesy and out onto Canal Street where the city ran its nighttime frequencies. The tourist pulse on Bourbon, the working city hum underneath. A streetcar making its argument 2 blocks up. He walked a block and stood at the corner and let his mind run the numbers. 40 hours to the federal hearing. 72 hours, 3 days, to Mendez's planned departure. Those timelines had just started competing with each other in ways that neither could win clean. He pulled his phone and texted a number he'd memorized and then deleted. Voss meeting done. Unsanctioned faction in the field, not his people in Kenner. Federal hearing, Thursday 40 hours. Call me. 3 minutes later, the phone rang. Kenner, Mendez said without preamble. He didn't know about it. Or performed, not knowing about it with more conviction than a man in his position usually manages. Voss is not a performer. A beat of quiet, not hesitation, something more deliberate, a man running his own arithmetic. If the Kenner people aren't his, they're working for the same principles through a separate channel. Someone decided the diplomatic approach takes too long. Or someone in the organization doesn't trust Voss to close it. Same result. Another beat. The federal hearing. Thursday. Hollis has been building this for 8 years. He's not going to pull back now. If the hearing produces a wrongful conviction review, the dive logs enter the record, Dolan said. And the coordinates with them. The line held quiet for 4 seconds. Move the departure up, Mendez said. To when? Tomorrow night. I can have the equipment check done by noon. Dessa files the float plan, the false one, by 3. We leave Empire at dark. That's 18 hours. The tides work better at night anyway. Dolan stood on Canal Street with the city moving around him and thought about 18 hours and a gray Honda and a waterproof motion sickness patch and what it meant that he was now negotiating departure times for an offshore salvage operation with a man he'd put in federal prison a decade ago. There's something else, Mendez said. Of course there is. Dessa ran a check on vessel traffic in the offshore area this afternoon. There's a private research charter anchored 12 miles east of the site. It's been there 4 days. Research charter. That's what the ICE transponder says. The vessel is registered to a marine science consultancy out of Tampa. He paused. The consultancy was incorporated 8 months ago. 8 months ago, Dolan said. After you were given a release date. The timing is suggestive. Whose is it? That's what I can't determine. Not Voss. He didn't know about Kenner. and a man who doesn't know about his own unsanctioned team doesn't have a research vessel pre-positioned at the dive site. A beat. Not the Spanish agents. They work through official channels. A private research charter pre-positioned 4 months before I got out is not an official channel. Hollis, Dolan said. The quiet on the line had a different quality from Mendes's usual quiet. Not calculation, but something closer to acknowledgement. An OSA building a 10-year side drawer file doesn't have the budget for a private research charter, he said. No. But someone who's been sharing information with an OSA for 8 years might. Who? I don't know yet. Dolan turned off Canal and started back toward where he'd parked the Honda. Give me the morning. You have until noon. I need a name to run. The consultancy is called Azimuth Marine Sciences. The registered agent is a law firm in Tampa that handles about 30 similar incorporations and will tell you nothing. There's a woman with a laptop who hasn't left Voss's suite in 3 days, Dolan said. She's running his intelligence operation. If the research charter doesn't belong to Voss's principals, she might not know about it either. He turned it over, which means she might be willing to trade. You're going back to the hotel. Not tonight. Morning. Early, before Voss's rotation gets organized. He reached the Honda and stood beside it on the side street. Above the roofline, heat lightning moved through the clouds out over the Gulf, distant and silent, the summer's nervous system firing. Jack. Mendes's voice had shifted, not softer exactly, but less operational. The voice a man uses when he's departing from the script he's been running. The Kenner people. If they're in the field unsanctioned, and they're willing to move on you. I've been moved on before. You were a cop then. I was a cop with a pension, and a pension I no longer have, Dolan said. At this point, the credential set is roughly equivalent. A sound on the line that might have been the closest thing Mendes did to a laugh. Noon, he said. Whatever you find, noon. He clicked off. Dolan got in the Honda and sat a moment. The heat lightning moved again, south and quiet, and the Gulf was out there somewhere beyond the city's light doing what it had always done. Indifferent and enormous and full of things that had been waiting a very long time for the right person to come looking. He started the car. The woman with the laptop was named Reyes. Not her real name. Dolan confirmed this before he'd finished his first coffee at the hotel restaurant the next morning, where he sat with a clear angle on the elevator bank at 7:15 and watched her come down at 7:40 in jeans and a linen shirt, no laptop, a tote bag, and the purposeful stride of someone with an errand that is not breakfast. He followed her 4 blocks up Canal to a coffee shop that opened at 7 and was already half full with early shift workers, and he got in line 2 people behind her, and when she took a corner table with her coffee and her phone, he took the table beside it and opened a newspaper he'd bought at the hotel gift shop and read it badly. She was maybe 35. Dominican, he figured. Something in the cadence of her Spanish when she ordered the specific vowels. The phone she worked was not the same one she'd have upstairs on the laptop. This was personal, smaller, older. She moved through it with the focused economy of someone reading something they've been waiting for. He gave it 4 minutes before he put the newspaper down. Azimuth Marine Sciences, he said without looking at her. The phone movement stopped. Tampa registration. 8 months old. He kept his voice at coffee shop volume, conversational, nothing that carried. I'm not Voss's. I'm not the government. I'm trying to figure out whose research charter is parked 12 miles east of a dive site in the Gulf, and I think you might be trying to figure out the same thing. She set the phone face down on the table. When she spoke, her English carried the precise, slightly formal quality of someone who learned it academically before they lived it. Why would I tell you anything? You wouldn't, Dolan said. You'd trade. Information has value when it moves. Sitting in a hotel room with it doesn't cash out. She regarded him with the measured attention of someone running a risk calculation. Not frightened. Assessing. You were in the parking lot in Baton Rouge, she said. The Crown Victoria. I drive a Honda now. Yes. Gray. Hertz airport location. Rented on a visa ending in 4471 that belongs to a man named Rafael Mendez. She picked up her coffee. I'm aware of you, Mr. Dolan. Then you know I'm not a threat. I know you're a retired police officer with a suppressed evidence problem who has attached himself to a federal parolee. She said it clinically, as a file description, not a provocation. Whether that makes you a threat depends on what you intend to do next. Right now I intend to find out who owns that research charter. A moment of assessment. Then, it's not sanctioned by Voss's principles. That much I worked out. The registration traces through 4 shell entities before it clears, and the 4th entity has a beneficial owner who is, she stopped. Reconsidered. Made a decision. A Spanish national. Private citizen. No government affiliation. Dolan set his coffee down carefully. Name. Adrian Cortez Weiler. He's a collector. Art, antiquities, maritime salvage pieces. He has a private museum outside Marbella. She held his eyes steadily. He also has a 20-year relationship with an agent of the Patrimonio Nacional named Vargas. The room reorganized itself around that sentence. Cortina and Vargas, Dolan said. The agents. Vargas operates officially on Spain's behalf. Cortez Weiler operates unofficially on his own behalf. They've worked in parallel before. Vargas legitimizes the approach, creates a legal framework. If the target complies, Spain recovers the material officially. If the target doesn't comply, she lifted a hand in a small gesture. Cortez Weiler's people are already in position. A private buyer, pre-positioned to move if the government offer gets turned down. With a research charter that has dive equipment aboard, she said. Yes. Dolan worked through it. 4 players, not 3. The Spanish agents with their treaty arguments and their bound documents. A private collector with a vessel already anchored at the coordinates he presumably got from Vargas. Voss and his principals with their contractual claim and their unsanctioned Kenner faction. And the Southern District's ASA with a federal hearing in. He checked his watch. 32 hours. Why are you telling me this? He said. Because Voss doesn't know about the charter, she said, and he should. And because the channel I would normally use to tell him is the same channel the unsanctioned Kenner operation came through, which means someone in that channel is not on Voss's side. She looked at her phone, still face down. I've been sitting in that room for 3 days, trying to determine who. I haven't. So you're loose. I'm reassessing my position. What's your actual name? She stood, gathered the tote bag, finished her coffee in one motion. It doesn't matter right now. She looked down at him. The charter vessel is called the Dorado. 12 miles east-northeast of the site. It has 4 divers aboard, and 2 tenders, and a man named Escudero running it, who has done similar work in the Mediterranean and the South China Sea. She pulled on her jacket. If your man goes in the water, Escudero will know about it before he reaches depth. She left without looking back. Dolan sat with his coffee, and the reorganized room, and the weight of a situation that had just acquired a 4th dimension he didn't have time to map completely. He pulled his phone and typed 4 players. Private collector with dive vessel, pre-positioned at site. Former agent connection, Vargas. Vessel, Dorado, 12 miles ENA. 4 divers, 2 tenders, man named Escudero runs it. Noon is tight. We need to talk. He sent it, and drank the rest of his coffee, and thought about a research charter that had been sitting 12 miles from the wreck site for 4 days, crewed by professional divers, waiting for someone to lead them to something they couldn't find on their own. The phone buzzed. Mendez, I know about the Dorado. Dolan stared at the screen. Mendez, I've known for 2 days. It changes the approach, but not the destination. Noon. Empire. Bring the patch. Dolan put the phone in his jacket and left cash for the coffee and went out onto Canal Street in the early morning heat, the city still ramping up around him, the river 2 blocks over doing its perpetual southward work. He'd spent 22 years as a detective on the theory that the man who controls information controls the situation. What he was beginning to understand, riding the current of this particular situation, was that he'd been the last person in it to know almost everything. It was, he decided, a novel experience. Whether it was a good one remained, like most things in his professional life, to be determined.